here. Hawaii has its own, Alaska has its own, and the continental U.S. As a group have their own. And so you count family size. So some of my Pacific Island clients have a hard time because sometimes the family size is large. So you have to show for example, if you have a family of 6 or 7, it's somewhere around $40,000 or $50,000 that you have to show income.
Okay.
And if you don't have that, you can get a joint sponsor, but that person has to basically attest that if the person being sponsored needs anything financially, to keep them up to living at least the poverty level standards, then they are legally entitled to provide that.
Okay.
It is an enforceable contract. It's sometimes used also between husband and wife in messy divorce situations. And the form's a little scary, and people are on the hook. And so oftentimes people have a hard time finding a joint sponsor. Or the people in their lives who would be joint sponsors don't earn enough themselves. So I have some Thai trafficking. They were former trafficking victims who are trying to bring their children. And the kids are overseas. They have to do an affidavit of support. They don't earn enough. And what's keeping this family separated right now is the fact that they can't find a joint sponsor.
Oh, wow.
And it's really hard. But
so the trafficking victims are able to come in because of that special program that allows entry, but they can't get their children in.
Well, they can if they can. So in this case, they already have their green cards.
Mm-hmm.
The husband, the mom and dad already have their green cards, and so they filed petitions for their children who are overseas. They couldn't afford to do it at the time, and so for different reasons, they waited. And now the kids are overseas. The kids need an affidavit of support for them to be able to come in as permanent residents, and we have everything else filed, but that's what's holding it up
because the parents aren't making. Whatever that 40.
So that's a real problem with the system and something that's very discriminatory against poor folks. So we're going all over the place, but we're hitting lots of things.
We're canceling things off. So average length of time. So how long does it take?
So the question is to apply for a visa, and there are lots of different kinds of visas.
Right.
It's like the alphabet soup of visas. So it really depends on what kind of visa you're talking about. There are immigrant visas for people who are intending to come and reside permanently in the United States, aka green card holders.
Okay.
And there are
student visas,
many more non-immigrant visas, right? Employment-based student visas, exchange visitors, people on J's who have come for post-secondary training, lots of professionals. So if you go to see a musical group and they're based in Japan, they're probably here on. They can't just come and perform and earn money here. There's a whole series of hoops that they had to jump through to get special performance visas that allow them to come in, earn money. And so it's a lot of preparation and planning involved.
Okay. So green card specifically, how long? What's the average length of time, or about?
So it's really slowed down under the Trump administration. Let's say a typical wife is a U.S. citizen, husband was maybe here on a student visa, they fall in love, get married, she wants to file for him. The process start to finish, once you submitted the forms until they had their interview, used to take about 3 months.
Okay.
Now it's up to, I would say, between 8 and 12 months.
Okay.
So much longer period.
Okay.
Right. You can go to uscis.gov, and there are processing. You can look at, for Honolulu, what the processing times are. You can look at for the service centers, what the processing times are, more or less. So,
and that does it for every state, kind of? There's a report?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So, well, for every state that has what's called a field office or district office, there will be a report.
Okay.
So that's also a good resource.
Does it matter what country you're applying from in terms of like time?
It does. And so for this was a great question. And I would say refer to the visa bulletin. Just Google visa bulletin. And this is really important because, and it affects a lot of people locally, because the wait time so you have what are called immediate relatives. And those are people who don't have a long line to stand in. And those are spouses of U.S. citizens, minor children of U.S. citizens, and parents of U.S. citizens.
Okay.
Everybody else has a line. Those categories are often oversubscribed, which means Congress allocates so many numbers, and there are more people who are applying for those spots than there are spots open. So you have to get in line. Okay, and for the Philippines right now, it's the worst. For like a brother or sister, I think it's petitions that were filed in 1995.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
What is that? 20?
22 years. I just
Wow.
looked at this yesterday. So India, Mexico, the Philippines, and China, if you look at the visa bulletin, they all have their own categories and wait times.
Okay.
And so depending on the family relationship, it will show you that they are processing petitions that were filed in 1995
Okay.
or in 2002 or whatever.
And that's because those groups are overrepresented, the applications. Okay.
Right. So, but what I tell people is that, especially now with the government talking about possibly eliminating some categories, that even though there's a long line, if you don't file the petition, you're not in line.
Right.
So think about it, but you got to kind of reserve your spot. And I think worst case scenario, if say brothers and sisters are cut off or parents of U.S. citizens are cut off, and there will be a battle over that, but I would think that they would have to grandfather in or recognize that the petitions that were filed before any changes were made have to be honored. So there's kind of a scramble right now for people to, but just filing the visa petition is $535.
Okay.
And a bunch of forms.
Right.
So it's not something that a lot of people can do lightly.
So when Congress sets the numbers, is this for every category?
Yeah.
So whether it's employment visas, it depends on where you're coming from.
Every category has it.
Okay.
Yeah. And and the visa bulletin is broken down into family-based visas and what the wait time is, and also employment-based visas and what the wait time is. And it has really nice, clear. I think they're pretty clear explanations of the categories and the numbers.
Okay.
So I'm often referring people to the visa bulletin. And it's updated every month, and it's put out by the U.S. Department of State.
Okay.
And only the State Department issues visas. No other agency can issue visas.
Okay. Great. And then I'll go through after this and pull out all the web references and kind of put them together at the end. This is so big. The question 5: what are the most common problems that you see around immigration and citizenship?
I think the most common problem is cases not being properly screened, and people applying for something that they think they're eligible for, and then finding out that they're not.
Okay.
And then
they wasted all that time and money.
They wasted all that time and money, but sometimes also it puts them in deportation proceedings.
Okay.
For example, if a person has a criminal offense and has had a green card, sometimes that criminal offense will, if the person leaves the country, they're going to have a hard time coming back in. So while people are here, they're often kind of flying under the radar.
Right.
It hasn't, maybe it's not serious enough to, for example, so one of the advantages of citizenship is you can't get deported. For permanent residents, however, permanent residents are vulnerable. Say if you have 2 shoplifting convictions at any time, you can be put into removal proceedings. Okay, so sometimes even for very small things will have huge consequences. So say you've had a green card, you've had 2 shoplifting convictions, you've never been put in deportation proceedings, but then you go to apply for citizenship. I've had clients apply for citizenship, go for their interviews, and then get arrested at their interviews and end up in the detention center. So instead of taking their oath ceremony that afternoon, they end up detained. So it was important before to properly screen. It's even more important now to make sure that before that person is going before an agency and saying, here I am, because that's the opportunity for the government to look at everything. And they are going through things with a fine-tooth comb right now and getting people on things that they didn't even realize were ever problems turn out to be problems.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So then there's probably, you talked about the situation is in flux right now, that there's certainly a different, that was the main point of his presidency was around immigration.
Right.
So there's so much in flux right now. So the question here, and then there's more. Under the current Trump administration, does Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Enforcement and Removal Operations, those 2 units, do they require and mandate professionals in every state to report people who are not here under legal status, are
No.
you required to report?
You are not.
Okay, because that has come up multiple times, kind of in the discussion boards in class, that there's a belief out there that that is true, that something has changed and you're now required to report people.
I think maybe where that comes is there's a lot of talk about kind of sanctuary jurisdictions,
Right.
which makes people, which often isn't explained very well, and it can mean different things. But kind of long story short, there is no mandate that teachers report students. That actually, I mean, there were some states that tried to do that, right? I think California, Arizona, which is horrible. Texas now, for law enforcement, I believe, has a law that says that for law enforcement, there's it was what's similar to Arizona was calling a show me your papers rule, where and other states where if anyone comes in contact with law enforcement, I think law enforcement's required to and this is the state is mandated this on local jurisdictions to inquire about immigration status and then take steps based on that status, where other states and other counties have taken the opposite view and said, no, our local law enforcement is not going to be deputized or forced to play immigration cop, that undermines the trust we have within our community. It's going to make people afraid to call the police if they need to call the police. And Texas, that's kind of the center of this, because Austin's come out very liberal and progressive about, no, we will not do this. And then Texas has come down. And so these are, all these things are being challenged in the courts right now.
So right now, if there is anyone who's possibly mandated, depending on the state, it might be law enforcement, but no other class.
And not in Hawaii, and no other class of people.
Great.
Yeah.
And what case is the hardest, as far as you remember, that you've had?
I have a case right now where there's a woman from Maui, and the case was in the news, and now she has she had a final order of deportation, took it up on appeal, lost, and it didn't lose because the case didn't have merit. It's just that the standards under the immigration law are very, very difficult. She did not have good representation initially. She's really afraid to return to Mexico, and she has now a new letter telling her sister, who paid the bond for her, to basically, it's a notice of obligor to deliver alien. So November 30th, she's supposed to show up at ICE, and she doesn't know what's going to happen. She's got 3 kids who are all born in the United States. One has a medical condition. Her ex was very abusive. One of the hardest things is talking to her on the phone last night and having her cry and say how scared she is.
Just the uncertainty.
And me saying, I'm scared too, and I don't know. And I think one of the hardest things is just not having the answers, not being able to
prepare,
take
anyone,
a wand
right.
and make the problem go away, knowing that the clients are going through real trauma, that their families are going through real trauma, and you can't always fix it. And so that's becoming more and more, especially under the current administration, because if there were significant equities before, you could often kind of not drag, but postpone maybe what was inevitably going to come. And a lot of people are now kind of really at the end of the road, and they're saying there's no more discretion, and if you've got this final removal order, no matter what, you got to go.
Okay.
And so those are my hardest cases, especially the ones involving families,
right.
And kids.
Right, and possible separation, and right.
Yep,
Okay.
and we're, if people had to go back to England or Australia or France or places where people could live possibly better lives, that would be one thing, but that's not the situation that most of my clients are in.
Okay. Is there any way for social workers to help people who are undocumented here legally, to help legally? And this, such as DACA, and this person was asking now that it is abolished. My understanding is DACA is not abolished; it's kind of in the suspension status.
Well, DACA right now is dead.
It is dead.
You cannot apply to have DACA renewed. if you still have it,
That's what's up in the air.
You've got it until the day